Welcome everyone to yet another survey analysis video. This time, same as last time, I'm joined by Lobster. It might be a recurring thing. I think it worked quite well for the last one. We got a lot of great feedback and we're ready to analyze the results of the latest, the pre 2.9.0 survey analysis. It was a very short window of time because of the EU Masters occupying my time in the weekend. So we had only, a 16-hour window to record responses. But thanks to the moderators sticking the thread and you guys for giving it some more visibility, we actually got the record amount of responses, 1,736. So sample size is bigger than ever, and I think that means that the results are hopefully pretty accurate. Lobster, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, that might also just mean that people have a lot to say and a lot to complain about in this current meta, right? And I think that is also kind of reflected in these general ratings that we see in the bottom right.
Before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm going to go over the general topics we'll be covering. Same as last time, with just a little table of contents here. Regional power level, regional thematic satisfaction, top 15 champions, bottom 15 champions, and controversial cards. And yes, Lobster, as you mentioned, looking at the general ratings, it's not a graph in itself, but just two little points of data. Game balance rating from 1 to 5, and deck diversity. Both of these have gone down since the last patch. And just as a refresher, the last meta we were in was TF Fizz Aphelios. So definitely not a good thing. This is again, it was already the worst record lows in the last one, so now it's even lower. Things have not gotten better. The change isn't so big for game balance. I think it was like a 0.25 drop, and for deck diversity, maybe like a 0.01. But the drop before this, from the normal meta to TF Fizz Aphelios, was like a 1 point drop on both ratings. So this is according to you guys, according to the perception of the community, the worst meta we've been in ever in Runeterra.
I love how you called it from normal meta to TF Aphelios meta. But yeah, it's a bit surprising. I guess before we had like 2 or 3 balance changes with very healthy matters. A lot of people liked it. A lot of variety in decks and deck building potential. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what exactly it is that the community perceives as broken, though, and that's what we have all of these upcoming graphics for.
Let's get right into it. We'll do some live editing here, and we'll see the regional power level graph coming up. I'll quickly go over the data here. Shadow Isles, actually, wait, let me get rid of, okay, everything's fine. I don't know why this red dot's here, but never mind. Regional power level, Shadow Isles leading the pack, 4.06. It's always been a top 3 region, so not too surprising to see that. Targon, 3.68. Shurima, 3.66. Freljord, Noxus, Ionia, Demacia. I guess maybe not Demacia, but those next 3 in a pretty healthy spot in the 3.20 range. Demacia, 2.69. Piltover and Zaun, 2.63. And Bilgewater, 1.64. Bilgewater used to be, part of the big 3, and it's hard to imagine any of those big 3 going down, which is Shadow Isles, Targon, and Bilgewater. But now Shurima has usurped that spot, has taken the life force that Aphelios and Twisted Fate left behind, and obviously now with Nash's Thresh and Azir Aurelia, and just the newer cards that got added this expansion, I think it's going to become a big 3, and unless a lot of nerfs come in, it'll stay in that position as well.
Yeah, I mean, Bilgewater's main reason to be in that top 3 spot used to be the Twisted Fate Fizz deck. Apart from that, Bilgewater didn't see all that much play, if I recall correctly. Also, of course, the Boxtopus Aphelios combo gone now. Therefore, it makes perfect sense. Bilgewater just doesn't really see play in any archetypes besides Deep right now. And I mean, Deep is kind of a meme sometimes in and by itself. Not really surprised to see Shadow Isles on top again. Of course, the insane flexibility of having both some of the best aggro packages in the game and some of the best control packages in the game, and therefore enabling a deck like Watcher while also being part of a deck like Thresh Nasus, just marking people down.
Exactly. I mean, and also I think you mentioned Bilgewater. The fact that it went so low is Deep is good, but not good into the meta. More as a tournament deck. Everything else has been butchered. We'll talk about the regional thematic satisfaction a bit more, because I think that's the main element about Bilgewater, with Plunder and Nab and all these archetypes that don't have really a home anymore. But yeah, it is sad to see it so low. That used to be Ionia's spot. Ionia, obviously at 3.10 now, is artificially inflated. I think due to the Blade Dance being as overtuned as it is, just on its own, just a few cards, not the region itself. Obviously, Aurelia coming in helped that. Other than that, it's Lee Sin and little else. That being said, I think, and I mentioned this to you, Lobster, privately before, but I think Dancing Droplet, its inclusion, is a great step forward in terms of giving life to the recall package, giving life to cards like Homecoming, to Namora Conspirator, and it's kind of like Ballistic Bot for PNZ. I think it did the same things. Obviously, PNZ is not great right now either, but that's mostly due to Champions still not being great. Heimerdinger, Victor, a few others not really finding a great spot, and so many unplayable cards in PNZ as well that really don't have any kind of a home or any kind of an archetype. It's Allegiance cards, just so many cards that are completely forgotten. Other than that, talking about the power level, Noxus, again, aggro strategy is very strong. Other strategies like Swain, for example, not so much. So I think it's why it's in a healthy spot now. It's kind of good and bad. Maybe as things change with maybe a card like Equinox, for example, Leviathan come out, and we can see more Noxus control strategies as well, like we used to back in the day. Freljord, kind of okay. Overwhelm is in a good spot, and I think a healthy spot. Strong, but not, oppressive. The Watcher, obviously a problem, and Lissandra, and maybe Ashe not seeing the play rate she used to see before. But overall, Braum and Vlad found some homes. Anivia maybe is not seeing so much play, but because I think there's a better control strategy, so why play it? And maybe Tryndamere is also not doing so great. He's not in overwhelmed decks either now. But
don't forget the Elusive deck. There's that Elusive deck with Trevor Snooze Bottoms and Battle Fury Action. That's a lovely one.
I was going to mention, like you're saying, Elusives, I think, is part of why Ionia with Dancing Droplet, I think, got a bit of a push. I played Zed Teemo as well. You played Zed Elusives, I know, with Freljord. And we'll talk about it in regional thematic satisfaction as well. I think it's the reason why I got a small bump in that section. But I think this kind of covers regional power level. Any thoughts going forward in terms of how you want regions to evolve, or what changes you kind of want to see on a broader spectrum to see these bars? Obviously, the ideal would be for them to all be even, but how to make these a little bit, more even?
That is a very good question. One thing I still wanted to mention about Shurima is I think there's only really two decks, so it's in kind of a similar place as Bilgewater was in the previous survey results. There's really only those two decks that are a bit overtuned, and it's always the same cards and packages being played. It's the Merciless Hunter package and so on, parts of the aggro package, and in Azir it's of course Azir, the Doomkeeper, Spam, and so on, Shaped Stone, Deus, those kinds of cards. So I think that if those two decks do get hit by the patch, it's gonna, it might find its home back down where Bilgewater is again, because a lot of the other packages just don't do that much. I guess we'll go more into details on deck archetypes later on. I think one of the biggest problems right now is that the meta only really allows strategies of either being super fast aggressive decks, whether it's Burn or like a tempo deck like Azir, Aurelia, or TF Fizz even. And on the other hand, you have the control decks, which just have these explosive finishes. Stuff like the Watcher, of course, comes to mind. And you can just, most of your deck, you can just run these anti-aggro cards, be very efficient at removing them and controlling the mid-game especially. And yet you only need a few cards to get, to end the game on the spot. You just need, for example, Lissandra Trundle, Matron. You got everything together, more or less. And there's not much of a place for mid-range right now, and all of these creative deck types like Plunder, like you mentioned before, a lot of these mechanics just don't get the chance to shine because it's so much in the direction of either be super fast or super control-y to counter those super fast decks. At least in my opinion. Looking
at Plunder, looking at Bilgewater, and looking at just the I think general scope of things, I'm gonna go ahead and say I think the game is in a very good spot once you fix the very, very overtuned stuff that's very obviously a problem for anyone that has any kind of sense about competitive play, or even just a casual player that has intuitive sense about value and just you don't have to look at win rates or play rates. I see Blade Dance the moment it came out after a week, and I said, okay, this is intuitively in my mind, I'm seeing so many unfair things being done in one deck, and things that I know shouldn't be in a card game that's balanced. I don't have to look at play rate to know it's broken. And I think it's the case with Azir Aurelia. I think it's the case with Thresh Nasus. I think it's the case with the Watcher combo. Once those few cards get changed, and we'll look at this being reflected in all the graphs later on, and this is something I wrote at the beginning, and then I saw the graphs, and I'm like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Once those few things get changed, there's so much balancing that has been done over the past year and a half is still there. It's so well done. The base of the game, the base core set, Rising Tides, with maybe some changes reverted. I think Make It Rain, for example, is an interesting change to give a regional advantage to Bilgewater as an anti-aggro, with Make It Rain obviously killing a lot of cheaper units, and also giving Plunder a bit more of a tool once again. Riptide Rex, for example, is another possibility. But overall, that's the key point I think for this entire survey is the game is in a very good spot once the devs decide to make one very big balance patch that fixes all the issues that I think are so blatantly a problem right now. Once that happens, and once I think a few maybe buffs occur to things like Heimerdinger, Lux, those archetypes as a whole, Make It Rain, for example, a few other things, the game is in a very good state. But unless they pull the trigger and make the nerfs that I think are so obvious to make, we're going to continue being in this state where if there's going to be, like last time, Blighted Caretaker and Atrocity nerfed, that's not enough. I mean, that's very obviously not enough. Dark Nasus continues to be 15% play rate, a Zero Elia, 20% play rate. And that's kind of my general, I think, perception on all this. So it seems very bad looking at like the general balance and deck diversity ratings. It's the worst ever, but it's so easy to fix as well, in my mind at least. And just stop power creeping so much on new cards, like a Felios and now a Zero Elia, and it's that easy, I think. But if you follow the same power creep as Rising Tides, which I think was a good expansion overall, then we'll be golden.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to approach this. One is nerf the overtune stuff. The other one, of course, buff everything else. But I think that one's way harder to follow because you just literally need to buff like 100 cards to get all of these archetypes on the same power level as the ones that are very dominant right now. One deck I would maybe add as well to the ones you said that are problematic, which is not really surfacing right now, though might become a problem again in the near future, would be Lee Sin, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see in the champion ratings, but Lee Sin continues to be, even though he's not played as much on ladder and all this, I think people are aware that it's always going to be a controversial card because of the way he ends games and how polarized the answers are to his playstyle and just the deck archetypes, win conditions. But let's move on, because I know people were complaining about us staying on regions for too long. So I'm going to try and make this a 1 hour video, ideally. Regional thematic satisfaction. A lot of the same discussions will be happening because obviously we're on regions, but let's try and get some extra data to help us out here. Regional thematic satisfaction rating. This is kind of the people or the community's perception of how many decks can I play in a certain region? Is there diversity in my options? Do I like the themes of the region in terms of lore-based, or Shadow Isles, for example, always going to be the leader, I think, and always has been the leader in this graph because it's a cool region. It does a lot of things well. Now we have the Slay archetype also becoming bigger and having its own thing, but it has its, this killing units to get a benefit kind of deal, and like just all the archetypes and cards. It's the perfect example for me of what a region in Runeterra should look like, and it seems like for the majority of the community as well. Targon coming in at 3.11. Quickly to note that runner up at 3.11 is very low. We've always seen kind of a big 3 as well in this regard, or maybe a big 2 at least, with like a 3.5 following Shadow Isles. So this is not a good sign at all, in my opinion. Freljord 3.02, Piltover 2.92, Noxus 2.91, Demacia 2.55, Shurima 2.45, Bilgewater 2.04, and Ionia. Despite Blade Dance coming in, despite it being now a very high play rate region, still 1.72, and I think this is the clear, sign that the community does not think Blade Dance is fun, and the community is not playing as Aurelia because it's a fun archetype. They're playing because it's fucking broken. Sorry to say, I can curse here because it's my channel, so I'll say it like that. And I think that's the data clearly, signaling this. It's risen 0.20. It was 1.5 in the last survey, and I think part of this 0.20, sure, a little bit can be attributed to Blade Dance, but a lot of it can also be attributed, I think, to Dancing Droplet, and like we mentioned before, Zed Elusive's kind of gaining more traction now as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that immediately pops into my eyes is the discrepancy of the power level perception of Shurima and Ionia, and here the thematic satisfaction. And I think that's exactly what you alluded to, is that the power level only stems from these 1 or 2, maybe 3 archetypes, those set of cards, and everything else is kind of forgotten or unplayable. And although I think Ionia, just like lore-wise and so on, is a super cool region, super well designed, it has like a lot of nice arts around it and so on. People are just not happy with seeing or being bashed by the same deck over and over again. Apart from that, PNZ, almost a little bit of a surprise to me that it's ranked up this highly, because it seems to be barely playable
Mm-hmm.
as of right now. Maybe in some aggro combos, Zoe Vi, but overall, a lot of regions in this midfield,
Mm-hmm.
around 3 points. Not
Yeah,
too bad.
I agree. PNZ is surprising considering that it doesn't have that much diversity, and there's so many cards that are kind of forgotten that don't see play at all. That being said, it is, and I think maybe it's this perception of it not being quite there in the meta, but still having high ratings because it is a very big support region. It's not really the main, on the spotlight as the main part of the deck, but Ezreal Draven, discard aggro, Foundry, for example, Teemo is finding success. Zed Teemo, I played it a lot. Not a very good deck, but still a playable deck now with Dancing Droplet and Homecoming. Overall, I think it's there as a support region. It is maybe like Shurima, the same package of cards, Ballistic Bot, the removal spells, a few key cards here or there. But yeah, I think there is still a lot of unplayable stuff, so I'm surprised to seeing it so high up. Shadow Isles, I think we don't have to go too far into it. I think it's always been the most diverse region in that regard. Targon climbed a lot. This is, of course, in comparison to a Felios meta, where people were, again, if something's very good, it might rate highly in the power level graph, but not here because people don't like it because it's so oppressive, for example. And that was definitely the case with the Felios. Now, with the Felios gone, I think it's always been maybe polarizing, but still a favorite into a lot of people. A lot of people really enjoy Targon, a lot of people don't like it at all. But now that Felios is gone, the people that really like Targon, I think, have voted it back up to where it used to be before, which is the top 2 rating. With Zoe obviously being a fun champion, you can use in many decks, and Dragons, of course, also coming in. I think also helped both Demacia and Targon. We didn't talk about Demacia rising a bit in the power level. I think Dragons was a big part of that, despite Fiora going down, for example, as a sacrifice.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think Targon is fairly diverse. You can also build some aggressive strategies. Nightfall comes to mind. Also, if you look at tier 2, tier 3 decks, some other like Noxus combinations for aggression, but also a bit of mid-range, a bit of top-end control, very versatile region. Also just cool design, cool art and everything. I think people also factor that in. And overall, I think these satisfaction ratings are fairly streamlined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Freljord, we talked about it before. I was flamed in the comments because I said that I was surprised to see it so high up. Not necessarily surprised, it was just that it was one-dimensional in some ways, I think, with the Watcher and before that even, Lissandra Trundle. It's always been Freljord and Shadow Isles as a control combo. Overwhelm has become more of a thing. Braunblad has become more of a thing. It was becoming more of a thing as we did the last survey. Now, even more so. I think it's cemented, at least not a huge play rate, but it's there. It exists. And a lot of other smaller decks Overwhelm, and yeah, I mentioned that already. So I think 3 is a good healthy place to be for Freljord, and definitely not much more to say there. Noxus, we talked about this. Aggro, very good. You have Azir Burn, you have discard aggro, Ezreal Draven. I think it's there in a lot of places. Missing, I think, the more control-y aspects of the region with Swain, for example. And of course, I think there have been some decks with Vi and like Riven type attack buffing strategies that have worked. I think they haven't caught on yet, but I think there's definitely a chance for the perception to change in that regard once that becomes a more popular archetype. Although it is maybe quite similar to Ezreal Draven and certain other things, but I don't think any card changes have to be made to have that, kind of like with Braunblad. I think it's waiting for someone, for like a big content creator, someone to make a push, and I think it can become quite a bit of a bigger deck in the meta.
Absolutely, and it just needs the right spot in the meta. The Noxus control tools just can't keep up with what is necessary right now, which would be Watcher-esque control tools, big board wipes and so on. You only have Death Lotus, it's not so consistent. But yeah, maybe in the future we will see more Swain decks back on the rise. I mean, Culling Strike is still a great tool, the Scorched Earth Guillotine, all that kind of stuff. I could see that make a bounce back in the future.
Yeah, I think it's more Equinox really holding back Leviathan, for example, and any Swain deck because of that. And also, like you mentioned, the Watcher holds back any control strategy really because nothing's better than that. So why play it really? And when you won't beat it because it just has much more tools and just a much cleaner combination of cards that can kill you pretty consistently at turns 8 or 9. So once the Watcher gets nerfed, if it does get nerfed, I think that would already do a lot in opening the doors for not just Noxus control, but just any kind of control strategy to do a little bit more work.
Also, of course, Noxus mid-range might make a resurgence with all the reputation cards and so on. That's something we didn't touch on yet.
Yeah. Demacia, Fiora down, Dragons up, kind of left it in the same place, I think, or a pretty similar place. Bilgewater, we talked about. Plunder, maybe a few cards like Make It Rain being reverted could do a lot. And looking at the NAB package, I don't know what they can do with it, but once they touched it, they really didn't see play again. And there's just, again, I think a lot about card games, just like at a competitive level, is trying to do what's unfair and what, within the rules of the game. And Bilgewater as a region doesn't seem, maybe deep once Azirelia and like very aggro strategies get toned down a bit, can find a better place in the meta. I think it got a lot of great tools with Bone Skewer and Sea Scarab. But this whole, Sejuani, Plunder, Gangplank package just seems too fair to really have any space in any kind of meta anytime soon, unless changes get made. Make it rain would be a big way of giving it some kind of advantage against aggro in its region that might be better than other regions because it doesn't have life, so it doesn't have all the other things that other regions do have. So yeah, we'll see if they can make it a bit more unfair so that people would be inclined to play it.
I mean, I think part of the Plunder package being underplayed is that a lot of the meta revolves around super synergistic decks, and all of the cards are not that good standalone, but they really combine well into each other. So for example, if you plunder a Deus out of an Azir deck, or if you nab a Ravenous Butcher from a Nasus deck, you can't really do that much with it. It's almost like worse than your main deck draw, even if it's discounted. But of course, if that changes, if the main decks are maybe more spread out, like every card is more or less of a similar power level standalone, then nab also just becomes a bit stronger, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I also think NAB, the original changes they made to actual numerical values and mana cost was maybe not the correct way to do it. I still think that, some form of, instead of stealing the card, copying, getting a duplicate kind of, or something more similar to Spell Thief, I think, which maybe doesn't fit as much thematically and lore-wise, because obviously the whole aspect of NAB is stealing something and the person you steal it from not having anymore, not duplicating something, because that would be more into like the spell magic type synergy that Zoe has. But I think that would be a more correct way of getting into the process of, making it less hated from a perception type standpoint, but still the value and the mana and, the actual balance is the same, and still would be playable, I think. But yeah, like you said, that's already a downside of NAB. The fact that there's maybe too much synergy in certain decks, and then it makes NAB worse than the process. But that would be, NAB auto-balancing itself, I think. So that would maybe be a good thing in some ways as well. And it could be, maybe not the most competitive archetype. I think it's fine, but at least for it to be playable, to have, some kind of advantage to playing it either from a fun perspective or, whatever it is. And yeah, Ionia we won't touch on too much. Lee Sin and now Azirelia. Hopefully Blade Dance gets, I think it does have to get, reworked entirely as a mechanic. And hopefully they keep adding on to changes like Dancing Droplet for other parts of the region as well. Not even sure what parts they are because I haven't played Ionia in so long. But as a reference point, I think a card like Ballistic Bot, like Dancing Droplet gets added that is playable. It isn't busted. I think no one's asking for Dancing Droplet nerf necessarily, but it does so much in really giving life to Navori Conspirator. You can play that in decks that aren't just elusive decks as a value tool. Homecoming now suddenly becomes a very cool kind of trickery style, like blue and magic kind of, you recall 2 units and then you have an advantage for doing yours. You get a drawback. Dancing Droplet getting a tune is great as well with the Allegiance card in Ionia as well that I played with Timo, for example. So I just think it's like Ballistic Bot, a fantastic example of design. Strong but not overrated, but still so good for the region as a whole and that archetype specifically. If they can do more of that, I think Ionia will find life once again. Same with Demacia with like the whole Lux Mage Seeker package. They just need to find the cards that really can. You don't have to change all the cards in the archetype, just 1 or 2 that are big enough that will bring others back to life as well without changing every single card and making it weird from like a 30 changes in balance patch perspective.
Absolutely. I think Ionia is one of the regions where I would say it really would benefit also from having some of the weaker cards or weaker packages in the archetype get buffed, to just make it more streamlined. At the same time, you'd probably still have to rework or nerf the Blade Dance package, like you said. But Ionia needs of some love. I absolutely agree.
But not the Blade Dance kind of love. That's like that's the abusive love. We need some nice, caring, tender love. Nothing abusive, please. All right, let's move on then to top 15 champions. We're gonna get into the meat of it now. We've only spent 24 minutes on regions, so I think we passed this time lobster good enough. Top 15 champions coming up. I want to quickly go over them. Azir 4.51 leads the pack this time around. Irelia 4.09, the two champions in the top play rate deck. No surprises there. Lissandra 4.05, Nasus 4.04. Again, no surprises. Very, very clear parity between these two champions and two just big monoliths of the current meta with Nasus Thresh and Lissandra Trundle control. Zoe, strong, but I think you can see the drop there from 4.04 to 3.59. I think that's, 3.5 or so is the place where champions are strong. They're maybe a big part of the region, a big part of enabling a lot of archetypes, but not necessarily broken, I think, and not necessarily in need of nerfs. Lee Sin, you mentioned before, still, despite not being really in the meta too much, the community has not forgotten. I think this is very clear that people don't like this too much. 3.44, I think is very strong. Draven, 3.42. Finally, my boy Draven, I think, for the reflection of what he does in the meta, I think, getting a bit more recognition. And we can see, again, my mention at the beginning of the video with a few key things being very overtuned and the rest kind of mellowing out. This is the first time that in the top 15, a champion under 3 makes it in. It's because everything seems so much more balanced towards the middle, or even on the lower side, that there are a few key problems. 4 champions above 4, but everything else has mellowed down a lot more. Fiora's gone now as a problematic thing. We see, Trundle, Aesol, Ezreal, Jinx, Shyvana, at least. Those are not problematic cards. No one is asking for nerfs for those cards. They're strong, maybe. They're, bouncing in and out depending on their place in the meta with certain archetypes being stronger or weaker, but there's so much balance. Everything is so fine, once you go under Lee Sin, I think. And again, if you address the key issues, I think if you make some big changes and don't release champions that are busted every other expansion after this one, I think we'll be in a very good place.
I have to absolutely agree. With some singular cards, I'm almost a bit surprised. Resh, I almost would have expected to see a bit higher, but I guess he has been fine for so long. It's literally just this one deck where feels OP. Some of the new mechanics are just hard to design new cards around. Something like Azir, which is like the card standalone is, of course, it looks absolutely fine, but adding that in certain combinations, like with the Blade Dance spam, of course, overtuning the card insanely. And these kinds of mechanics, in my eyes, always tend to be able to go to the extremes very quickly, like either extremely unplayable or extremely strong and playable.
Yeah, looking at more specific cases, I think, for example, Thresh is taking the place of Fizz in the last survey. He's not broken. He hasn't changed at all. But because he is the partner in crime of Nasus in the tier 1 deck, then yes, he will seem more oppressive. I think with the Slay package added, he has become more efficient and better in the way his chances of leveling up. I think he was already quite playable before, just didn't find the right home. There was not really a big champion higher than 6 cost that you could play him with. I played with him with Aesol for a bit. The deck wasn't too great. And Tryndamere, there wasn't great options. Nasus now is a great option, obviously, that works really well with him. I think his true rating would be somewhere around 3.20, to be honest, but this is always going to be a reflection of the meta, and I think it's very easy to see why it's a 3.50. The same with Azir. I do not think Azir is a 4.51 champion, regardless of what the community thinks. And this is because I think I have maybe a more clear understanding of, like you mentioned, Azir in an Azir burn deck. He maybe levels up sometimes, not always. I think when you level him up, it's your last attacking turn when you're playing out your units, and you just level him up and you go for the final swing and you win the game. And that is Azir, how he should be played. But when you add Blade Dance synergy, where on defense you're able to summon 10 units in a turn, then obviously it's not Azir that's broken, it's Blade Dance that's broken. So I don't think Azir should be changed. I think maybe a minor nerf to his health. I think maybe the 5 health is a bit too much. But in terms of the units level up and all this, I think it's fine. If you play Azir in a normal deck, you'll level him up when you should be leveling him up. That should be the payoff of playing a strategy that has Dune Keeper, that has House Spider and Azir Burn, for example. And that's, again, Blade Dance is the problem. The same for Irelia. It's always the flawless duet, which is the card you summon, the spawns, and Blade Dance is the big problem there. Lissandra, same with the Watcher. I think Lissandra is fine as a champion itself with her toughness, her stats, the tough on the Nexus, the Ice Shard generation is a bit maybe too much. I think maybe it shouldn't be 0 cost. I think it should maybe be 1 cost, for example. But the Watcher is the key problem. And Nasus, maybe the Scarab damage or attack debuff is a bit much on top of everything he does. I don't know how you can do it, so maybe it only affects the strongest unit possibly, not the whole board. It does feel like, I always forget that it's there sometimes when I'm playing Thresh Nasus, and then he levels up. I was just thinking about the Spell Shield and the Atrocity, and then I see the debuff, I'm like, damn, this sucks. This too, really? But yeah, I think for a lot of these champions, they're going to be inflated because of the perception of the current meta. But for someone that maybe has a bit more experience with game balancing and with understanding why the fluctuations are happening, I think it's easier to see that some champions aren't really necessarily changed. It might be controversial. Do you agree that Azir shouldn't be nerfed, or should be nerfed maybe the health but not too much more?
Yeah, this is a super interesting discussion. I think there's also two ways of approaching this, because Azir in itself is fine in the same way that Blade Dance package completely by itself without Shurima is also fine.
Yeah.
I think as long as you don't overtune the buffing and so on. For example, playing against MF, Aurelia feels a lot more streamlined and fair in my opinion. Azir Aurelia is just overtuned because these two things come together, and then you have multiple ways of approaching the nerfs. Is it the Ionia side, the Blade Dance itself? Is it the additional unit summit plus buffing that Shurima provides? Or is it maybe something in between, some interaction in between these two regions? Yeah, I think this is a problem we will encounter more and more, though, the deeper the card pools. Because, of course, it's very hard to not... to oversee all of the possible interactions with all champions and cards with the new cards, and not have anything that might be overtuned there, especially if you have mechanics that are so so full of potential value, like Azir or Aurelia, like Lee Sin, like Karma technically as well.
Yeah, it limits design space, I think is what you're trying to say, in terms of the long term. You have to be retroactively looking at the cards that are in the game when you're releasing new cards, and cards like Azir have the potential to be broken. Cards like Sparring Student, that since the base game were never a problem, we'll see in the controversial cards, but has rated very, very highly because Blade Dance breaks the design that this design space this card is in. And it's never been a problem until now. The card hasn't changed. It's never even been close to a problem. I've never seen someone say, oh no, I was playing Expeditions and someone played Sparring Student turn 1 and I lost. But because Blade Dance is doing something that is so exaggerated in the amount of units you're spawning, I don't know why. I don't think Blades should even count as units, to be honest. I mean, it should be its own thing, kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts type strategy where you're constantly getting attacked. But like you said, 1-1 blades, okay, great, I'll block, fantastic. But it's 3-1 blades, it's 2 Sand Soldiers coming out, it's the Azir leveling up, it's all this happening on your defense, on your attack token turn, and the Blade Dancer's defense turn. All this things being compounded is what really creates the issue. I think they have to really rework Blade Dance as a whole, either looking at again, blades not counting as units, would fix Sand Soldiers coming out or not, would fix Azir leveling up, would fix all this. If they don't want to do that because Aurelia's level up also is involved with counting units, at least it can't happen on defense token turn. I mean, there has to be some limit. They created this monster that has no restriction. It does whatever it wants in all aspects, and like the units being buffed, the units being summoned, defense, just all these things added up that really make it, despite win rate, despite play rate, just something that you can see as a card game player that anyone that has played card games and that kind of has a game system in their mind of what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed, what seems unfair but still fine, what seems unfair but oppressive or going to be oppressive. Especially someone that has played other card games, Gwent, Magic, whatever it is, all these different systems. If you're someone that thinks rationally and analytically, and especially competitors that are very good at card games, they're good at this because they're able to take the system and start computing, what can I do, what can I break, while still making it unfair. Anyone that has this experience intuitively can look at Blade Dance and say, this is broken on so many levels, regardless of play rate or win rate. And this is something that's the only thing that worries me, that devs have released this in this state, and regardless of what the numbers say, can't see what I'm seeing, and see what so many, I think, other pro players and content creators are seeing, even just, I think, average players, to be honest, because it just seems so wrong in my eyes.
Mm-hmm. And one interesting takeaway here, though, is that because it's overtuned, broken on so many levels, there's also a lot of ways of potentially addressing that problem. And that is why I find it very hard to predict what's going to happen in this balance patch. There could be a lot of different possibilities of tweaks, and I'm just very excited to see what it's actually going to be. I
think going off of this table, we've gone over everything, I think. The lower champions, I think there's not much to talk about. I think they're fine. They're not really broken or need a balance. They're just, yeah, like I mentioned before, highly rated and strong in certain archetypes, but are just staple strong cards like Elise, for example, but not necessarily in need of checking in any way, I think. Let's go over the bottom 15 champions. So a bit of a change of pace here. And we will start things off with Taliyah at a 1.39 rating. Not the lowest ever. I think Lulu had a 1.33 in the last one, and there's been a few 1.30s, but still pretty low. Heimerdinger, 1.56. Katarina, 1.56. They've been this way for a long time. Lux can join that party, 1.6. Nothing new to see there. Following that, a bit more new stuff. Zilean and Malphite, 1.6 each. Both champions that were recently released, both champions that were obviously completely overshadowed by Irelia and Merciless Hunter, the two best champions right now in the last release. Aphelios, 1.66, obviously got a huge nerf, a very hard card to balance, I think, from what it was to what it is now. There's a lot of space there, obviously, in its rating, and one of the biggest drops I think we've ever recorded probably in the champion ratings. But again, you can't make the mana cost for the weapons 2.5, so it's hard to really balance that without reworking him entirely. And I think the devs and they should like the design, because I think the design is great, but it is very hard to rework to rebalance without reworking. So we'll see if they can solve that issue, because I think Aphelios is a cool card, but the way it came in was too strong, and now obviously it's too weak. Lulu 1.76, Karma 1.84, Taric 1.84, Quinn, Victor, Tryndamere, Yasuo, Kindred, all pretty low on the spectrum. Quickly, I'll go over my thoughts on these last few, because I think we're not going to talk about them too much. I think they are low rated, but I think they're not necessarily in a bad spot or in need of a rework. It's just like Vladimir was before. They need a deck to shine in, and a deck that the community can perceive them as. These guys, they can all go up to 2.5. When Scouts was good, Quinn was 2.5. Nothing has changed there. It's just like, I think, the reflection of the meta. So all these cards, I think, maybe not Taric, but everything above 2, I think is fine. I think if they find the right spots, Victor, we saw it played in seasonal, I think, to a very high. I'm not sure what player, what region it was exactly, but I remember someone playing Victor to maybe like semifinals or something with a weird deck. Tryndamere, yeah, there's just better overwhelm options now. They've kind of power crept a bit with like Rune Runner and certain cards that make Tryndamere obsolete. Yasuo maybe needs a bit more help somewhere. I think in just a lot of things have been added, but never the right things to make it really playable. Although I think it's a fine champion, but yeah, maybe a bit more help than the rest. And Kindred again, I think Kindred we can talk about a bit more. What is your opinion on Kindred as a champion?
Kindred's an interesting one. I actually like her design in and by itself, but I think the issue with Kindred, as well as with many of these other low-ranked champions, is that they are rather value-driven or a bit more control-y, and they just don't have a chance to shine right now because they either get outraced by Azir Irelia or they get out-comboed earlier on by other control decks like the Watcher combo. So I think as soon as more mid-rangey decks become more prevalent, then these types of control decks that can deal well with mid-range but take longer to close out games also become more prevalent. And good examples there would be Kindred, Tryndamere, Victor, a value generator, also control tool, maybe Karma, maybe Malphite. Malphite might need a buff though, to be honest, but Zilean is also a good example in my eyes. An insane value tool, but he just needs a long time to pop off. And maybe Taliyah. I expect Taliyah to go up significantly if we get more or less expected changes because of the Turbo Thralls archetype that might make a splash into the meta then. One thing I did think was kind of funny though is that Malphite is higher rated than Zilean, because I personally have not seen any Malphite deck that is borderline playable, and Zilean can at least make some splashes and be somewhat playable in combination with Nasus. I've seen it, and maybe with Zoe with a bit of Targon action.
Yeah, I wouldn't give too much credence to the difference in these ratings. Obviously, they're very, very little difference. And again, when you're rating things so lowly, I think you're not really maybe taking it seriously from a response perspective. So again, I think you can lump in everything under 2. And that for me always, from 1 to 2, anything falling in that rating for me has always been a reflection of something that needs a buff. And in many cases, it's been the case that the devs have, maybe not the next patch, but over time, eventually look at these cards as cards that need reworks or need buffs altogether. I agree. Taliyah, I think, is lower than she should be. I think, again, so much, and the whole reason of this survey and this video is perception. It's not just balance, it's perception. And really, I think in this digital age, we saw with Brawl and Vlad last survey where someone was playing it, then you were playing it, then I was playing it, and a few content creators were playing it. And in this digital age where social media, where Twitch, where YouTube matters so much, with any video Mong guy does, if he has a video on champion and does well, it's literally going to up the ratings by like 0.30 or 0.40. And that's how it is. And people have to understand this. Taliyah came out when Shurima came out without any support. She was deemed unplayable, and maybe for good reason. And it's hard to recover from that. I think from a perception standpoint, even if people, it's not a hive mind, it's not all this, but all this adds up. And you don't think about, even if new cards get added, you look back at Taliyah, you open the deck builder, you see Taliyah, and you just see like a meme, or you just have this connotation in your mind of it not being a viable champion or anything close to competitive, and you just immediately don't even consider it as an option to play it or anything. I think Taliyah is suffering from that a bit. I think you mentioned that the Thrall's archetype makes her, I think, better than almost all the champions on this list. Or maybe not all of them, but at least 2 rating or so. And she's going to be the lowest. And we'll see if she gets changes in this next patch, and if maybe that archetype, maybe with the last expansion from Shurima, also adds more things. And if changes to Malphite would obviously be like double dipping with Taliyah as well. So we'll see if any of that ends up happening. Lux, I think, is a champion that seems very weak right now. Even I think people have mentioned her level up. She gains no stats, for example. I mean, there's a lot of things about her and the whole Mage Seeker package that I think needs changes. Do you have any specific opinions on Lux as a champion?
It's just too slow. She suffers from a similar thing like I think Yasuo and Kindred do, the lack of mid-range where she would shine. Because it is a value tool that takes a long time to generate that value though, and the control she provides is not as immediate. You don't have these AoE board wipes, but rather you start chopping down single units with lasers over multiple turns. Lux might just be a bit behind in power level just in general right now, because all the other cards have gotten better, the game has gotten faster, the games end sooner. Maybe with the resurgence of mid-range, Lux becomes more playable. Not sure if she needs a tweak right now. I think other champions have higher priority of tweaks.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that there is a window of like mid to late game control options right now, that there's so many things that are seeing no play. Like you mentioned with Kindred, I think is a great way to highlight it because of this reason, that the Watcher exists at the top end, and then there's everything that's so much faster. Even Thresh Nasus, that is not really an aggro deck, but it can be so aggressive in how it plays out and everything that it does feel like that way. And again, it feels like everything is so much more unfair than any kind of mid to late game mid-rangey control options that there's no reason to play it, and when you do play it, you just feel bad. So I think that's a bigger concern in terms of not just specific card or champions or decks, but just broader design and perspective on balance from the dev team. And that will be obviously a long way to address that issue, because it is more of a core issue than just specific decks or archetypes. But I think that covers everything on the bottom 15 champions. I think obviously we would like to see buffs to maybe the more recent low champion like Zilean, Malphite, Taliyah. But also I think overall there seems to be maybe a chance for a Karma rework to maybe make her playable without making her broken. And things like Taric, I think, might need some help. I don't know from a balance perspective, from a perception perspective, because I think he does have some tools that can maybe help him. But I think maybe not enough tools. I'm not sure. I haven't really played it myself too much, but some of these champions can be like Vlad. They can just be kind of sleeping, waiting for the big moment to come out and find a home with certain champions or cards once. And again, this is so much the idea of, Irelia has 20% play rate, Nasus has 35 or 15% play rate. 70 or 80% of the meta is so set in stone and so clearly overtuned that this also limits everything else in terms of not even just them being worse in terms of balance perspective, but just from a diversity perspective, from a perspective of people saying, oh, let me experiment with Lux. You queue into Irelia and you're like, oh, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. So once these things get changed, and again, this goes off of like a few things being changed at the top end, I think it would fix so many other issues without having to actually balance things. So let's see if the dev team agrees with this view. Maybe not for this patch, but just as the general idea for the next few patches. I think because it's not. I think it's maybe not one big patch that's going to solve it. I think it's going to be several in a row, but we'll see. Let's move on to controversial cards. Top 50 or not 15 always, just anything above 3.50. And we see it here. Do you want to go over these, Lobster? I'll give you the.
Yeah, there's a new king, queen. I'm not sure what exactly the Watcher
I
is
think
supposed to be.
non
but the Watcher
non
tops-
gender.
Non-gender. It's the Watcher tops at 4.58, a super high rating. I don't think we've had too many scores that high, but tightly followed by the one of the best new champions in the expansion, Merciless Hunter, the better Callista. And yeah, I don't quite remember how many cards we had last time above a rating of 4. What is surprising to me here, though, is that they're all kind of stacked in these 1 or 2 decks. There's 4 Shurima cards.
We had 4
on the,
only, above 4. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, all of these cards above the rating of 4 are literally only spread out over these 2 decks, or 3 decks rather. I mean, Watcher and Matron, of course. I guess Matron also a bit with Big Citria is playable, and I guess a card like Doomkeeper and Merciless Hunter. I mean, Thresh Nasus and Zeralia technically. But yeah, it's literally just these 3 decks that everyone knows, that everyone always calls tier 1 decks. Thresh Nasus, Watcher, Matron combo, and Zeralia.
You very quickly picked up on this, and this again. I did a write up on Reddit. I already wrote most of it, and I wrote, the general ratings. I kind of already said like there's very clear archetypes. Everything else I think is such in a good place, but there's things that are obviously overtuned and disrupting everything. And going into this graph, I could not have been more right in this. Every single card in this list is part of the top 3 archetypes, as well as the staple region cards that are going to be strong but not overtuned, that are never going to get changed, like Sharpsight, like Troll Chant, like Star Shaping to some degree, like Hush, for example, and I guess Shapestone to some degree. Every other card is and Equinox, but this is the first time I pulled it because it's not a collectible card, but I still think, same as the Watcher, they can be nerfed and they can be perceived and balanced separately from their generator. Equinox is a big pool Celestial card. I think it can be balanced on its own. The Watcher, the same thing. I didn't add something like Flawless Duet, for example, because it is very much more tied to its generators, to Ribbon Dancer, to Irelia. But those cards, I think, were worth adding. I added the Serpent as well. I'll rotate a few more Celestial cards as we go along, because I know already some ratings for most of the cards I won't be adding to the ratings or to the polls, because I know they're not going to go above 3.50. But Equinox, very clear example of one that definitely seemed to be needed in this rating. But yeah, follows the system that we both very quickly observed. Every single card in the top 3 mana decks, and yeah, the few other staple cards, which really shows that once these decks get changed, maybe there's other cards that are not considered or perceived as OP because their play rate is lower now, because they're not, obviously there's always going to be something that's going to be broken. That's how card games work. But I think it goes a long way in showing that, it's so concentrated into these decks that once they get changed, everything I think will be so much better for the meta, for the diversity, and for everything. And hopefully the devs can see this as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very good thing that added those generated cards as well into the polling. Though it's there's no reason why they should be able to dodge the criticism and the potential card changes. And definitely, especially on this Magic Key aspect of balancing the game out overall. But yeah, even not only looking at the cards above 4.0, just looking at this graph as a total, almost everything is orange, pink, or blue, representing Shurima, Ionia, Freljord, the top 3 decks, a bit of green, a bit of Targon, I guess. Dragon's the only other deck, and Ravenous Flock represented by S-Draven. Everything only staple in those top 3 decks, plus maybe 1 or 2 additional ones. Everything tier 1 or tier 1.5 decks. And yeah, like you said, everything below seems to be kind of fine. Nothing really above 3.5. It's just the overtuned stuff.
A few more key things to note. Shadow Isles, for example, has a few strong cards here. Ravenous Butcher, Curse Keeper, Spectral Matron. A big part of why there aren't more is because Shadow Isles is power is spread out over so many different cards and archetypes, and because it is just a very well balanced region, I think. And a lot of its strength is in its champions as well, and to some degree, with Thresh now, and just a few others as well. But for Shurima, it's the opposite kind of. I mean, you have Nasus, of course, and Azir, but so many of the cards are the ones pulling the region forward. And these are, I wanted to pull 5 cards per region maximum to not get too biased. I have been exceptions before. Shurima was the exception this time around as well. I added Shapestone as a 6th. That being said, there's Rune Runner that was pulled last time and hit at 3.70. I think it hasn't changed much, so I didn't really want to pull it again, and there wasn't really space for it. But the list for other regions, Bilgewater, no card above 3.50. I mean, just so many regions that were just not there at all, that were very, very, very balanced, I think. Shurima, not the case. It's power creep, and it's the individual strength of a lot of its cards. They have 10 different cards that, like every other region before, has gone through balance patch. These cards get hit. Next one, these cards get hit. And it's been like ironed out slowly, like, hey, down, down. And then eventually now it's balanced. Shurima has to go through this process, and we might see a few changes this next patch, but it's gonna, there's Rite of Negation, which is a strong card, that's fine. Rite of Calling, a card that I think we both agree maybe has to see some sort of a change. I think 0 mana, Slay, at least in the shell of Thresh Nasus, I think it's too efficient at what it does and adds too much consistency. Rune Runner, for example. What else am I missing?
On the Shurima side, can't really think of much more right now. What does strike me with Shurima, though, is I also think there would not be too many cards in this mid-section around the 3-point rating. I think if we would also poll bottom cards, I think there would also be a lot of Shurima cards there.
Yeah.
That's why, to me personally, maybe it's still because the region is incomplete, but there's, definite polarization within this region between very power crap, super strong cards and cards that stand alone don't really do anything.
Kind of like PNZ. PNZ, I think, is in a similar place where it has not obviously the top strength level isn't as high as Shurima cards, but they have a lot of staple, very playable cards, and then a lot of, garbage cards that regardless of, and I know for sure it's not a perception issue. It's not these cards need to find a home. It's these cards need to be reworked and rebalanced because they're just, like I mentioned before, like the whole perception and intuition of like game systems and what's unfair and not. They are unfair to put in your deck, let's say, like because they're so bad. And I think it's very easy to see that the value isn't there for most of the cards, a lot of the cards in PNZ, for example. And Shurima, I think, has a similar thing. Target I wanted to mention as well, as just looking at, actually let's look at the just full champion. This might get a bit scuffed here. Oh no, it's not scuffed. All right, we're good. Sorry. Looking at the champions here, I'm going to go over the middling section, but also we can look at just the entire champion and kind of the spread of the champions. We see Bilgewater always near the middle here, a big, amount of champions, but nothing really over here. So showing that there's no reason to play it really. There has to be at least one big champion that's giving you a reason to play it. Not the case for Bilgewater. I wanted to mention Targon as well. We have Zoe. Aurelion Sol, I think, is higher than he should be. I think he's strong champion, but it's kind of because Dragon is becoming big. He finds a home now with Thresh Acewell as well. Portugal is playing in EU Masters, but still, I think a bit higher than he should be. And then Soraka, Diana, okay. But then you have Taric, Aphelios, Malphite. So much of the region strengthens in its cards and its champions. I think that's a problem with design and with, archetypes. Champions are essentially the key cards that set up an archetype, and then you have the support coming in from the cards. And for Targon, it's the other way around, which I think might be problematic going forward. That was just one point I wanted to make about Targon, but let's go over, if you want, Lobster, the kind of the middling section pass going down from Renekton.
What strikes me here in this middling section is that there is a lot of tier 2 decks, so a lot of these can be considered playable. You do see them on ladder every now and then if you don't run into Aurelia or Azir, or Nasus rather. And what I also found, like, a lot of these have seen play in tournament settings, especially looking at the EU Masters that we were both casting. In wider lineups, a lot of these are considerations. And this is exactly like a simulation where you can take out Aurelia, Azir, and either Thresh Nasus or the Watcher, right? And all of a sudden, a lot of those power levels change, and all of this becomes interesting, like playable and good options. Let's see if there's anything. Is there any standouts that you are surprised by here in the middling section, Panda?
I think overall, a lot of the ratings have gone down by a bit, which I think is normal when something is very, very strong, or a few things are very, very strong, and they're taking up a lot of the pie chart of the play rate and the perception and the top of mind of players and the community overall. It's normal for other things to feel, because they're being played less, you see them less, and they feel like they're weaker, even though they haven't changed. Things like Teemo, for example, have gone down. Fizz, obviously with TF Fizz, but just everything. Miss Fortune has never been this low, even though she got changed with her overall, but that wasn't a big change, I think, really. So the Fate obviously nerfs, for example. Nautilus went up a bit, which I think Deep is in a better spot in tournaments at least, and maybe without Azir Aurelia would be good in the meta. So I think and he's always been around this section, but overall everything has gone down a little bit. Sejuani has never been this low for a long time. Fjord did the nerf, that's fine. Sivir went down a bit. Lucian, etc. All this is because these champions that were kind of playable, tier 2 competitive, have all lost a bit of their share. So it's normal for them to have all gone down in the perception, even though the balance is the same. So I think there's not too much to read into there.
Yep.
A few champions. Go ahead.
In comparison is the keyword there, right? Everything kind of went on in comparison, although the cards themselves didn't change. And as soon as the top high gets cut up, then in comparison, everything else sees more share of play, goes up a little bit.
Yeah. Once you make these key changes, and obviously, I mean, people have to understand that the ideal world of a card game is for everything to be at 50%. Because that way you don't have any reason to play one thing over another, and there's going to be the most diversity, and that's obviously there's going to be other trends that maybe make things, and the meta itself correcting itself. If aggro is very strong, then it'll control itself in a way. But overall, this is just the case of a few things being very strong, public perception and the digital age kind of catapulting these things even more forward. One of the strong things being a new release card with a new mechanic is part of it. Not the fun aspect, just the fact that it's new. I think that's something that they mentioned in the Riot post that. I don't know. I don't think any person with a sane mind can feel like they're having fun playing Aziralia. I don't know. It really seems because I think it's so clearly overtuned that at least for me, for EU Masters qualification, competitors have a reason to try and compete. Okay, you get a pass, but for everyone else, I'm sorry to say, if I queue into you and you're playing Aziralia, you're not my friend. I'm putting you on the list and I'm remembering your name forever because. I think you have to know, regardless of how much fun you're having, you're ruining the experience for someone else. And that sounds extreme to say, but I really think that's the case with a deck like Aziralia. It's not fun to play against. And this is obviously a multiplayer game, and you're not playing the AI, you're playing against someone else that has to deal with this, really. And it shouldn't be on the players conscious to decide what decks they can or can't play because of how it should be like this situation shouldn't exist in a card game. I think it sounds very extreme, but I think this is a way to maybe highlight it in a very extreme way that I think the mental aspects of what you're queuing and how you're feeling about the deck in relation to the perception in the meta or in the community, etc., are things that really shouldn't be a part of a card game. You shouldn't feel bad for playing a deck. That's kind of crazy, but it is the case with Aziralia, I think, and with other very strong decks like Aphelios and TFIz and Go Hard in the past. So ideally, obviously, everything is in the middle, everything is rated 3, and we live in a world where everyone is created equal, champions, cards, people, whatever you want to mention there. But Yordles also included. No disrespect to the Yordles. But still, having something from 2.50 range to 3.5 is also obviously more realistic and more fine. So problems a bit on this side, I think. Or I guess just these 4 really. This is kind of on the spectrum, but mostly, Thresh is just a part of Nasus, and then obviously this entire section, I think up to here maybe just under 2, and all of these are kind of victims of there not being space for innovation or space for experimentation or space for slightly subpar things to try and find a home or try and find more play rate because there's some bullies at the top that are not making that a possibility.
Yeah, I think you summed it up very nicely.
I don't know if nice,
sure what I said, yeah.
if nice is the right word, maybe realistically.
Rather, I mean, you got a bit emotional there, but yeah. It's a bit of a case of don't hate the player, hate the game, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like, it does often feel like you are forced into playing either something that can compete with Aziralia or the deck itself, though, if you want to win. And I mean, everyone kind of plays this game to at least win half of the time, and or to have fun, and always running into the same play patterns and getting rolled before you can get your own twist of your deck to work. Like, the whole idea. Imagine trying to play a back alley barkeep deck just for the lulz and queue up normal, you get farmed on turn 6 before you can even play your second barkeep. And
in case it needs clarification, I obviously don't have a list of players I'm noting down for playing Aziralia, but I'm close to having maybe a mental list to some degree. But yeah, it is a case that I'm going to admit I'm not Masters this season yet. I haven't played the game other than a few games here or there in like a solid session in 3 weeks because to me, this is it's an unplayable meta. And I'm someone that I've never played, I don't know, any tier 1 deck pretty much ever. I've never played Thresh Nasus, I've never played TLC, because I don't have fun playing mirrors, because I don't have fun playing what's deemed too strong. So I like to have some sort of a challenge and finding things that are, tier 2.5 like Braum Vlad last season. I will play a lot of aggro strategies like spiders and stuff because I have a low attention span. I like playing fast games and getting wins, and I like being competitive still. But I will play a lot of kind of competitive memes, let's say. And this season does not allow for it. You queue into Zero Relia, there's a non-game. There's literally no chance for me to play something subpar and have any chance at winning. When you're playing something tier 1, you have maybe a slight chance if you have a good matchup and all this. But anything tier 2.5, unplayable in this meta. And it really sucks because I love experimenting with things that are not complete memes. I won't play, some things that I see played on stream because I know they're not going to win any games. But I like playing things that can win more games than people would expect or that I would expect. That's kind of my motto most times in card games. And this meta does not allow that, which is why maybe I have more emotion than I usually have. But I think still, like I said at the very beginning of the video and the very beginning of my Reddit post, the game is very balanced. There's just a few things that have to be fixed. Overall, I think the reflection of these ratings for like the perception of balance and all that is more exaggerated than it should be. And I think if the right changes are made in not the next patch, but the next 3 patches, and a bit more control and just perspective is used for future expansions in terms of like lopsided releases of Irelia alongside Zilean and Malphite, where there's like intuitively clear disconnect there between power levels that should be, I think, obvious. And with Blade as a synergy, for example, as well, things like that I think should never gone into the live game at all, for example, in the state they're in. If those things are addressed, and if expansions look more like Rising Tides, for example, I think, life will be good, and Runeterra will. I think it still is obviously the best card game in regardless of. 20% play rate compared to Magic or other games is not a lot, but for what we're used to, I think things can be better. I think we know that, and I think the devs have already shown how much confidence they have in balancing, in design and everything. It's the reason why Runeterra is so good now. So I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy, and I think we'll make it out of this one. It's been a rough 6 months since like Go Hard was a thing, and things haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse, which is every patch that has come out, every meta has come out has been more and more surprising that things could get worse. But I think the base and the fundamentals and everything are there, of course, and we just need more aggressive balancing and more regular balancing and bigger risks to be taken, I think.
Yeah, one last thing I want to mention, and I think it kind of explains why the balancing has gotten harder over the last couple of patches, is, of course, people in this card game want to see more and more new mechanics, more and more play styles, and more play patterns added. And the more complex these play patterns and mechanics get, the higher of a skill gap is going to be there with the people piloting these decks, right? Azir Rally is a perfect showcase of a deck that's extremely hard to pilot very well. And that probably also explains why the 52% win rate meme and everything, and why it took people a while to pick up on how strong this deck really is. And I think part of it is also people just getting more experienced on it, also watching more content creators piloting it, watching more guides on it, and so on. And over the course of the last few weeks since the release, the average level of piloting the deck has also just increased. The win rate went back up. But this is something I noticed multiple times in multiple metas, like starting with Lee Sin, I think, when all of the content creators and competitive players were agreeing that the deck's beyond broken, but the win rate didn't support it. And then you have this old question of, who do you balance the game for? Is it those top 0.1% who do have a lot of influence, though, because they're known on social media and all, or is it for the broad player base? But I think at this point, it might have been the case with a deck like Azir Relia just a few days after the release, that the pros already felt like it was overtuned. But I think, like I mentioned earlier on, at this point, most of the players are capable of piloting Azir Relia on a level that the overtunedness kind of just shines and makes them overperform relative to the skill level and relative to other decks.
Yeah, design opportunities and the potential of things, if played well, for example, has gone so much higher with Aphelios, with Lee Sin, with all the recent metas, really, and that's why win rate I think is not a great standard. I do think things should be balanced, maybe not over like Masters ladder, but Diamond Master, because at the end of the day, this is kind of it's all math and a solution, and there's something that's busted, it's going to be busted everywhere once people catch on. I think we've already seen the importance of the competitive side of things, seeing the perception of things, seeing the play rate of things, like it all trickles down, even if it's different, obviously, at Gold, for example. But I do think the standard should be at the top, and I think it makes sense from, I mean, because card games are an objective thing and because they're kind of a math-based thing, if people are, let's say, solving it at the top end, that should be the reference, not, I mean, I think that's hard to explain. I think that would be a whole other topic, but I think you know what I mean. One more thing.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. So you go.
One more thing I wanted to mention as well, that I've seen a lot of, just going to quickly mention this as an anecdote. I've seen a lot of people offering balance suggestions, how to nerf things, and looking just at numbers and stuff. And I think a lot of people miss the idea or the fact that aside from just the numbers of certain things have to make sense. They have to look clean in a text. They have to make sense from a flavor perspective. You can't just rework a card and ruin its flavor. Like, there's a bigger picture of balance in a card game, and there's so much like thematics and flavor. I think Riot as a whole has done a fantastic job of translating champions and skills and all this from a lore and theme perspective to their actual mechanics in game. But I see so many people doing things like making a 0 level up at like 13 units. That's ugly. It's not gonna be in the game. Like, they're gonna rework in different ways, or I don't know what other changes I have off the top of my mind, but certain things that are like Spectral Matron, only being able to copy units under 8 mana, like that, it's an ugly change. It's not a clean change, for example. I mean, maybe that's not the best example, but overall. So if anyone watching this and want to offer balance suggestions, please keep in mind the bigger picture of things, that Riot is, I don't know, there's a certain cleanliness in text, in presentation, in intuitive of someone reading a card, a new player, and understanding that this is how it should work. And you can't bog it down or make it too ugly or make it too complex or have a huge line of text that, all of this factors into how a card is created and balanced and reworked. And people, I think, are missing that point in so many posts I see about, this is how the card should work. So as just a message to the community as a whole, if you're watching this, keep it in mind. I think there's a lot of great suggestions, but some of them are missing this part. And although the balance is great and the card would maybe be more fair in game, it won't happen ever because it's missing some other minor things that add up to the mechanics of a card and how it should be in the game as well. I think that's everything, Lobster. 1 hour and 6 minutes. We've reduced it from last time. Well, I think we'll slowly start shaving off seconds here and there.
Nice. What was it last time again?
Higher, like 1.115 or 1. I can check really quick.
Okay. I will get under 1.
Oh no, it was 107. We fucked up. End it.
I did real quick.
All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you guys for the next balance patch survey analysis type thing. So take care and leave a like and subscribe and all that stuff. Bye.
Yep. See you around. Bye bye.